The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anuj Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. Got another interesting show coming up this week where we'll be talking about cannabis education and content. But again, I just want to mention a couple of upcoming conferences before we get started. Cannabis Europa guys are crossing the pond for the first time with conferences in Toronto and New York coming up in November in a couple of weeks. The goal is to provide valuable ways in which North American businesses can enter the growing European medical cannabis market. Be a great mix of government trade delegations, ministers, MPs, senators, cannabis industry leaders and entrepreneurs who will all be sharing actionable insights alongside some great networking opportunities as usual. Cannabis Europa, the Transatlantic Forum, is in Toronto on November the 5th, and Cannabis Europa, the Leaders Summit, is then in New York a couple of days later on November the 7th. As mentioned last time, these guys put on some really great and high quality events, so it's a must for you and your business if you're interested in that market. I have a 10% discount code for those interested, so please check out my LinkedIn, which I think I made a post this morning with the details. I'll be making another one in the next few days. Also, I mentioned last week as well, I've got a giveaway for a conference I'm speaking at in Malta, so more details after the show. Okay, let's go on with it. Today, I'm joined by Max Simon, who's the founder and CEO of Greenflower Media. Greenflower are a cannabis education platform. Max has previously worked with Deepak Chopra, which he'll tell us a bit more about in a minute, I hope. Welcome, Max. How are you doing?
Great to be with you today. I'm good.
Good. Thank you for joining me. Yeah, I mean, there's lots to talk about here, and I think it's really interesting what you guys are up to, both on the content and the education side. But why don't we kick off a bit about your background and what were you doing pre-cannabis? What made you go into cannabis, and why did you set up Greenflower?
So I've been a cannabis patient here in California for a few decades now. I use it for ADD, and it's been pretty game-changing for me. So I have a long relationship with the benefits of cannabis. And in early 2000s, I got a remarkable opportunity to help Deepak Chopra build his products business. And so I ended up creating about 50 of his signature products, building all of his online digital channels, developing the brand, and ultimately reaching hundreds of millions of people through online and offline methods. Why that was so relevant was because I learned how to take a subject, in this case, it was meditation and mind-body principles, and something that people didn't know much about, was pretty widely misunderstood, wasn't, quote unquote, backed by any science, and was seen by really what was a fringe society into something that became mainstream and widely accepted and embraced as valuable set of tools for our health and wellness in society. And so I see cannabis very much the same way. And when I was looking for kind of my next thing after building a few other businesses that were successful, I started looking into cannabis, and I just saw this unbelievable parallel between when I started at Chopra in early 2000s and where cannabis is today. And yet this time I understand how that story plays out, and I see how it gets accepted and adopted by mainstream, and how if you build an engine that stands for trust and credibility and education, you can not just build really great businesses around that, but boy, you can sure make a big impact in the world. So that's how we started Greenflower.
Brilliant. Yeah, there's lots there to talk about. I mean, there's that real passion about wanting to kind of demystify something that, as you said, has been much misunderstood, in a similar way that you're referring to sort of mindfulness and wellness in that respect, the work that you did with Deepak. Well, before we kind of get into a bit more of the other details, I've been talking about this bit recently with a few others, and someone wanted me to do a show on it. And I thought, while you're here, I might ask you your opinion. What do you think the reasons are that the climate has sort of changed in the last few years to sort of reopen the doors to cannabis becoming a legitimate part of society, particularly in the US? Because I know on a federal level it's illegal, but at least outwardly speaking, from people who are outside the US, sometimes it can appear quite conservative in some respects. So it seems quite weird that there's this sort of booming cannabis industry that's about to happen or is happening.
I think there's two factors. I think one is that, let's face it, cannabis is actually quite effective. And there's a reality that when people are suffering or struggling with something, especially when it comes to their health, that something that really works and works well, you can't keep it a secret for too long. And so cannabis is quite effective, in particular for the main reasons why people use it: for pain, for sleep, for anxiety and depression and stress. Those are the main predominant reasons why people choose cannabis. And let's face it, it works, So I think that one of the reasons why the shift has taken place is just the benefits have continued to gain momentum and traction as an effective tool. And then secondly, it's about money. The thing I always like to bring people's attention to is that the alcohol industry is a $1.4 trillion a year industry. And yet alcohol is a neurotoxin. It has one delivery method. You drink it. It has been shown to cause many different ailments and conditions. It kills a lot of people every year. It has a pretty substantially terrible safety profile. And yet it's a $1.4 trillion industry because people like to change their consciousness. And here you have cannabis, which is roughly a $40 or $50 billion industry right now, if you count the whole global sector. And it has 7 different form factors, and it has neuroprotectant qualities, and it can be used not just as a social lubricant, but also as a medical aid. And so there's such a huge growth margin there to go from something that is inherently more effective and more beneficial and safer for the world, and yet still so tiny in contrast to things that are more widely accepted and embraced in our society, like coffee or like alcohol or tobacco or any of those other things. So I think, everybody's understanding that there's so much potential, and that's the other reason why the industry is finally progressing.
Yeah, and lots more to come, I hope and assume. Okay, well, why don't we get into a bit about Green Flower? What exactly is it that you guys are trying to do over there?
So we serve different audiences with different cannabis education products. We have streaming subscription service, which is really more for consumers, and it teaches people about how to use cannabis medicinally. It teaches people how to grow. It teaches people how to cook with the plant. It teaches people about all the different historical experiences and colorful characters, and kind of educates consumers about the more serious side of cannabis and how to do it right. But in 2017, we started in 2014, which seems like ages ago at the moment. In 2017, the industry really started to pick up momentum and speed, and thus people were trying to enter the space but didn't have any knowledge or credibility or ways to distinguish their specialized knowledge. And so we built Green Flower Academy, which is an online training platform for different sectors of the cannabis space. So we have programs that are cannabis cultivation trainings, and we have medical application trainings and patient care about kind of interacting with individuals and guiding them to the right products, all the way to very simple trainings like a cannabis fundamentals program that kind of gives people the lay of the land. So we have this whole suite of online trainings where people that want to get into the cannabis industry can take to give them a real advantage and a real level of credibility quickly, which you really can't get anywhere else right now besides on Green Flower Academy.
And are you giving accreditations as well with that?
So these are certificate programs, which means that when you complete them and you pass the exams, you get a certificate of completion. But to get an accreditation program, you actually either have to become a school, which we weren't interested in doing, or you need another accrediting body to accredit those programs. And it's only recently that accrediting bodies have been open to doing that. And so both our medical program as well as our compliance and regulation programs are actually going through accreditation processes right now so that those programs are accredited. But, it's been another byproduct of the fact that most of the world didn't want to touch cannabis until really recently. And so we've been kind of ahead of the pack there.
Yeah. Do you mind me asking why you didn't want to go down the becoming a school route?
Well, quite frankly, it's because there's a lot of distribution channels for our material. And so if you're a school, you become a standalone institution where, you bring everybody to you. But we see tens of thousands of other distribution points for the content we've created, and that we could actually have a much bigger impact and build a more successful business through distribution partnerships that would allow us to utilize the networks that other people have. And so instead of competing, we're more of a collaborative education business. And that was just kind of a strategic choice that we made in order to build and grow.
I mean, that makes sense. And I think education as a whole is sort of changing quite radically with distance learning. So I think it sounds like a smart move. So, I mean, obviously I've checked out your website. Greenflower, one of the first sites that I looked at when I first got into this about 18 months ago, and full of great and really well produced content. Obviously, this is a bit of a loaded question, but is there a particular area that you really enjoy out of all the different topics that you guys cover?
I'm very fascinated by the health and wellness benefits of cannabis personally. I believe that a lot of the world is suffering right now. And they're suffering because they're really stressed or anxious, or they're lacking purpose, or they're not sleeping, or they're in pain. And all of these things can almost entirely be solved from cannabis, but you have to understand and learn how to use it properly. I think that we don't live in a world where there's been much guidance here. You know, there's a lot of talk about legality and laws, or there's a lot of talk about what's allowed and what's approved and what's not. But there hasn't been a lot of talk about how you actually interface in a way that's most effective. And part of that is because there's a big stigma around, using cannabis and the benefits it can provide. And yet I see it very much like I did meditation. It's an unbelievable tool and it has tremendous life-changing benefits, but you have to learn how to interface with it correctly. And you have to get into a place where using it consistently is really providing true value and benefits to your life. And so I'm personally, just because of the kind of person I am, I'm very passionate about that education point so that people can live healthier and happier and, more purposeful lives.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you've come from that background of the mindfulness, because the mindfulness and meditation areas have been big for me, and it kind of developed in conjunction with me learning more about cannabis. So it's really good to hear that you've got that experience too. If we can sort of delve a bit deeper, what are the sort of barriers and challenges you've experienced then? And you think that education is something that everyone wants, but sometimes it is a bit more tricky than that.
Well, I think that's probably the biggest challenge, is that this whole cannabis thing is so new. And when it's all new, people are trying to wrap their arms around it. And it's kind of a little bit more like dabbling. You're dabbling with this and dabbling with that and not necessarily taking it super seriously. And our biggest challenge is communicating just how serious and how real of an opportunity this truly is for people, so that when they take it seriously, they decide to get the education and training that's really important to their growth. And so, I can't tell you how many people I come across that are dealing with ailments and conditions where cannabis could help, and they kind of discredit it a little bit. They just push it to the side. Or people that are wanting to start new businesses or get in the industry, it's kind of a second nature kind of thing. Well, if it happens, whatever. But I think that for people that can take it really seriously and get the education, it unlocks such an exciting new world of possibilities. So being able to communicate the importance and the bigness and the seriousness and the opportunity of it to each individual person who has different needs has been the challenge. Because really, at the end of the day, that's the thing that's so remarkable and such a challenge with cannabis is some people are motivated because they're sick and they're looking for wellness. Some people are motivated by money. Some people are motivated by the opportunity to start a new career. Some are motivated by the ability to build something that they've never been built before. But tapping into that motivation in cannabis with each individual person when the audience is so wide is not an easy thing to do.
No, I can't imagine it is, actually. One of the things you just mentioned is quite key to my podcast, is the idea of career change, namely because, most people had a previous career before being in cannabis.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm really interested in that story of how people, I'm I always say I was a lawyer, and I've moved into this area, but everyone else has got a different story, come from banking or advertising or other parts of research. Do you guys cover that sort of angle as well?
Yeah. Like I said, that's the challenge, is every audience really has their own separate needs. Surprisingly, our biggest success stories have come from the people that decide they want to transition from other industries in. And that's because particularly our Green Flower Academy kind of lets somebody who's interested in a sector. So let's just say you're interested in cultivation. really understand from seed to sale, how do you cultivate commercial cannabis in a weekend? And by getting that level of knowledge and understanding, it gives you 1,000 times better ability to participate and succeed than just, wishing and hoping. And so we're quite excited about that career change, second career opportunity audience, because I think it's the one that we serve the best right now.
Fantastic. And which is your most popular course, if you're allowed to say?
Oh, yeah. The thing that's so funny is that none of them are necessarily more popular than the others. It actually drives me a little bonkers because you see that the demand is kind of spread out so evenly. But our medical applications program, which was specifically for healthcare professionals, was very popular. Our cannabis cultivation one, it's probably the best education you could get in a weekend, and you can do it online from anywhere. And so the cultivation one is very popular. And then most people start with our cannabis fundamentals training, which is our least expensive and gives people a full swath of understanding of things like cannabinoids and terpenes and products and how the industry kind of operates. And so actually that's probably our most popular course, but it's also because it's our first step. It's our kind of starter pack. And then from there, people go deeper into the next set of offerings.
Yeah, no, I can imagine it's good to have. Video is such a great new addition to education. It sounds weird to say that, but the more sort of video based and interactive you can make education, I think the more it sticks.
Right.
But yeah, what are your sort of plans for the future then in terms of what you're doing? You mentioned some of the accreditation programs you're going through. Have you got any other plans?
Yeah, the two biggest initiatives that we're working on, we do have a whole bunch of additional certificate programs coming out, like we have a CBD certificate and a hemp certificate and a business certificate and an extraction certificate. All of those are coming out right in the beginning of the year, right in January. I'm excited about those programs because, again, they're kind of niche areas that people are really interested in. But the two bigger initiatives that are happening is we are building a full enterprise training suite of products where companies in the financial sector, companies in the medical sector, and even just businesses can pick and choose the training modules, if you will, that are most relevant to their business. I think that it's going to serve a real core need with all these companies that are trying to expand, but don't necessarily have the training or the tools in-house needed to make sure that their people are, really skilled and knowledgeable workers. And so I'm excited about this kind of technology content development product that's being built specifically for the enterprise space to serve businesses. And then the other one, which is really intensely satisfying if it clicks into place the way it's looking like, is that we're actually partnering with colleges to power their cannabis curriculums. Right. And, we have programs in business and in law and in horticulture. And so we are working very closely with a number of schools here in the States to launch actual cannabis courses in 2020. And so that's very cool and cutting edge and exciting to see that develop.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. And in the first point that you mentioned, were you kind of responding to businesses? Were they coming to you and say, we need to upskill our workforce? Can you help?
Exactly. And again, a big part of that is that most companies are not hiring people that come from cannabis. They're hiring people that come from outside of cannabis. And so it's important as you hire people in to get them well trained quickly. Otherwise, there's such a steep, huge learning curve in this space. And so we had companies coming to us basically saying, we're growing and we're expanding, but I'm hiring people from outside the industry. So can you come up with a better solution so that we can get our people well trained quicker?
That will make sense. How do you hire your people, if you don't mind me asking?
We have a pretty extensive process, because one of the things we've realized is that cannabis is a trickier, more difficult industry than most. And so you need to have people who are really super resilient. And so we have a shockingly long and challenging hiring process that goes through about 5 or 6 different people, that includes interviewing from their skills to their culture alignment, to their commitment level, to their ability to be flexible inside this space. And so we kind of took a page book from Google who front loads their hiring processes and really take our time so that we bring people in, but slowly, but it is what's yielding kind of our ability to move as fast as we are growing.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, having gone to lots of different conferences recently, we've been talking a lot about the keys to making business success and people is probably the top of the list every time.
Yeah, definitely.
How much are you guys looking at what's going on outside North America?
I mean, we try to pay close attention to it because we see our ability to expand internationally as really an important part of the vision. It's just that there's still so much to do in the States right now. And, really there's so much opportunity for us to capitalize on here in the States that we haven't done a lot yet. I mean, we do get approached pretty often for international, but the challenge is that, every country, or even more localized than that, dealing with their own set of regulations and challenges and desires. And so it usually takes a decent amount of customization, which, requires you kind of starting mostly from scratch and then digging in.
Sure. It's one of the good and bad things, I suppose, of cannabis is that it's all developing in a slightly different way all around the world. But it means harmonization is going to take a bit longer as well.
Right. Exactly.
Not least within the US, I suppose, because each state is kind of doing their own thing too. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And how do you find that challenge?
I think one of the things that we've realized is that, at least in the education side, 80% of everything we do is relevant anywhere in the world, and 20% needs to be customized to XYZ fill in the blank. And so growing cannabis is the same here as it is in the UK. But there are going to be different vendors and different laws and different opportunities that need to be covered. And so that's why, we've focused on the US predominantly right now. But I would say that 80% of what we do is impactful anywhere in the world. It's just that 20% is, a little off.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. Cool. Last couple of questions I'm going to go for. One of them was, I understand that you guys have raised a bit of investment for green flower. How did you find that whole process?
I found it extremely challenging.
That's the kind of insight I like for my audience.
Yeah, I think everything in cannabis is more challenging. And part of it is just because you're dealing with 80 years of misconception about what this is and who does it and what this all represents. And so we have clearly been the largest producer of cannabis content in the world, actually, when it comes to education material, and had a huge head start. And also, the industry wasn't quite mature enough to recognize the value and importance of training really until, could argue, this year. And so we bootstrapped and raised little bits of money for 4 years, kind of hanging on by the seat of our pants. And only once the industry here in the States got to a mature enough level to see the higher ed opportunity and the enterprise opportunity and the fact that we can now start to do some digital advertising and all those things that were natural parts of our business opened up, we're able to successfully get an investor to write a big check. And so I don't wish on my worst enemy that they have to go through what took years and years of pain and struggle and almost going out of business a whole bunch of times. But fortunately, we were able to sustain, and now we have really enough runway to last us for quite a while.
Fantastic. And hopefully you're a trailblazer for the rest of us that have made it slightly easier.
Yeah, I hope so.
I mean, I think, it's a more mature market, obviously, in California in particular, but in Europe, there's money being raised, but I'm not sure how much is being deployed yet. We've got a lot of issues at the moment ourselves with Brexit and various other things going on. So it's an interesting time, but what I love about cannabis is that no one quite knows what's going on. So it's lots of opportunity.
And, not only is it lots of opportunity, but it's an entrepreneur's wet dream because the amount of ability to innovate and change perceptions and do things that have never been done before is unparalleled. Last week I got to speak at the ABA, which is the American Bar Association's, first ever cannabis conference. And that's the kind of the body that represents the largest collection of lawyers in the United States. And that was very groundbreaking. And we're about to unveil our cannabis at work policy, which is permitting cannabis during work hours. And that's very groundbreaking. And there's all these things that are happening that have never happened in the history of the world before. And I think that that's probably the most enjoyable part about being in cannabis, is that it is the most challenging thing. But if you like good challenges, it also has the opportunity to be one of the most rewarding, because you're just doing things that are historical. And that's just a fun feeling, if nothing else. It's a cool thing to do.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Cool. Well, thank you. Thank you, Max. My last question, this is one that I asked to all of my guests, is what did your parents say when you told them you were going to find fame and fortune in cannabis?
Well, it's a double-edged sword question, because my father died of a brain tumor about 7 years ago. And actually a little longer than 9 years ago. And what I know now is that cannabis actually could have been instrumental in helping him throughout that treatment, or even as a treatment option. So Dad didn't say nothing about it because he's gone. And my mom at first was utterly and totally shocked and confused and just couldn't wrap her arms around it. But I just told her to trust me. And I told her that what I was seeing and looking at was far more sophisticated than she was aware of. And so she did. And little by little, she opened up, and little by little, she got more curious, kept reading our articles and watching our videos. And then ultimately finally said to me, I'm not sleeping very well. Would this help me? And of course, the answer is yes. And the first night I gave her cannabis, she came out and said it was the first time in 40 years that she'd slept through the whole night. And so now my mother is a daily cannabis consumer, because she takes it every night for sleep. And that's the only way she consumes it. And she's a staunch supporter and, is very proud of what we've done. And even kind of more exciting part is that I can look throughout my entire family now, and everybody in my family, from my 99-year-old grandfather, all the way to my cousins that are 21 years old are using cannabis in some way, shape, or form, almost all for wellness reasons, not for, social reasons. But everybody in my family is kind of excited and converted and getting the value of this plant because of the education that we provide.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And that kind of trust thing, I guess your mother showed in you. And I think, obviously lots of people have grown up with it, being told it was a bad thing. So it's going to take a bit of unlearning to get your head around it. But glad to see that the rest of your family have been convinced.
Yeah, slowly but surely. I keep saying this, that within 50 years, cannabis will be celebrated as one of the most important medical discoveries of the 21st century. I say that because it just has too strong of an efficacy and safety profile. It works too effectively for too many things with too low or no side effects to not be adopted. And the only thing that will make that more difficult is all the misinformation and stigma that is slowing down all the progress in the first place. But that'll only last so long. Meditation, from when I started till now, it was about 15 to 20 years where it really became almost full adoption. And I think cannabis has got a much larger profile of effectiveness than meditation does. So I think that it's safe to say within the next 10 to 20 years, we'll have that same kind of shift.
Yeah, probably a bit of a higher barrier as well. But yeah, I completely agree. And some good quotables there in your final statements. That's really nice. Thank you. Cool. Well, Max, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show, and I'd love to have you back again next year once you've launched all the new things that you've been talking about.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. And of course, I feel like everybody who's out there creating content to educate people about the masses is really, we're on the same team. So I'm glad to see what you're doing and appreciative to be a part of it.
Great. Thank you very much, Max. That was great speaking to Max there. I hope you enjoyed it. For me, on a personal level, it's obviously a great angle to cover because it's quite inspirational as a content producer to see companies like that succeeding. Who knows, maybe I'll get some investment too, hint, hint. But generally very exciting times for me at the moment. Probably too many things going on. Clearly a few people actually listen to the show because after I mentioned I quite like hosting, I've been approached by quite a few people. I've got some exciting events coming up which I'll be involved in. One of these, I was asked to chair a video panel a couple of days ago by the Centre for Medicinal Cannabis to talk about a new industry body that they're setting up, which is a real privilege for me. And so that video I think is coming out this Friday. Please check my social to find out more if you're interested. The competition I'm running is in relation to the Medical Cannabis Summit in Malta between the 4th and 6th of November. So again, in a couple of weeks, I've got a couple of VIP tickets to give away worth €800 each. Please check out and follow the Cannabis Conversation LinkedIn page for more details. But essentially, I'm bribing you to give me a good iTunes review if you want to win. So please do that, whether you want to win or not. And I'll leave you now for the rest of the week and catch you next week. Cheers. Bye.